The silence in a subway tunnel has its own unique weight. It's not peace. It's the slumber of a steel beast waiting to be woken. A heavy blanket woven from the sense of damp concrete cold iron and the faint electric tang of ozone. For Kayla Cooper, it was the familiar soundtrack of her life. As a signal technician for the MTA, her office was the sprawling subterranean labyrinth beneath New York City. She was a ghost in the machine, a keeper of the city's metal arteries, and she was more comfortable in the echoing dark than in the bright, chaotic sunlight. Tonight, she was running a diagnostic on a faulty signal box in a disused stretch of track between the Canal Street and City Hall stations. The powerful focused beam from her headlamp cut a sharp, clean circle in the oppressive dark, dancing over gleaming parallel tracks and walls covered in the ghostly, layered graffiti of decades past. She was alone, but not lonely. The quiet was her companion, the predictable logic of her work, a solid comfort in a world that often felt anything but. She had just tightened a final bolt, the metallic scrape echoing in the cavernous space, and was closing the heavy signal box cover when she heard it. A sound that did not belong. A weak, stifled sob so faint it was almost swallowed by the ever-present drip of water from the ceiling. Kayla froze, every muscle tensing, every sense on high alert. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't the groan of settling metal. It was human. It was the unmistakable sound of despair. A deep, primal instinct honed by years of listening to the subtle language of the tunnels told her something was profoundly, terribly wrong. This section was a dead zone locked down on the grid. No one had any reason to be here. Hello. Her voice sounded small and alarmingly fragile as it echoed down the tunnel and faded into nothing. There was no answer, only another choked sob, this one seeming a little closer, emanating from the direction of an old crumbling maintenance spur that branched off the main tracks like a dead-end vein. Her professional training screamed at her a litany of regulations and warnings. The rules were absolute. Report any anomalies. Do not investigate alone. Retreat to a safe zone and call it in. But her grandmother's voice, a force more powerful than any MTA handbook, echoed in her memory, a moral compass that had never steered her wrong. When you hear someone suffering, you help. It's as simple and as complicated as that. She pulled the heavy wrench from her tool belt. It wasn't a weapon, but the cold, solid weight of the steel in her hand was a small, tangible comfort. She moved toward the sound, her steel-toed boots crunching softly on the gravel between the rails, the noise seeming deafening in the charred silence. Her light swept across the opening of the spur, and she saw the girl. She was sitting on the tracks about 100 feet away, trying and failing to push herself up. She looked to be around 8 years old, a tiny, fragile figure in the vast darkness. She was dressed in an expensive-looking silk dress, a pale blue that was now streaked with grime and torn at the hem. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, and in Kayla's headlamp beam, she could see that her wide, emerald-green eyes were swimming with a terror so profound it made Kayla's own heart ache in sympathy. Kayla started toward her, forcing her voice to be a calm, soothing anchor in the terrifying dark. "Hey," she called out gently. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Are you all right?" "How on earth did you get down here?" The girl flinched violently at her voice, scrambling backward like a frightened animal. "Please don't hurt me," she whimpered, her voice a reedy whisper. "I ran away from the bad men. Bad men." The blood in Kayla's veins turned to ice. This wasn't a lost child who had wandered off. This was a victim. She'd been kidnapped. Just as that horrifying realization settled, a familiar sensation vibrated up through the soles of her boots. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily, insistently, a vibration every track worker knew and respected with a primal, instinctual fear. The ground began to tremble. A distant grinding roar began to build from the far end of the tunnel, the screech of steel wheels on steel rails, a sound that meant unstoppable momentum. And then she saw it. A single piercing point of light, impossibly far away, but growing larger with an alarming, unnatural speed. The 2 a.m. Express, the non-stop freight train that blasted through the system at full speed. A ghost train to the regular commuters, its only purpose to make the yards by dawn. It didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It only devoured the track ahead of it, and they were directly in its path. "We have to move," Kayla screamed. The professional calm shattering replaced by pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "Get up right now." The little girl tried to push herself up, then cried out in a sharp, agonized shriek and collapsed back onto the tracks, clutching her leg. "My ankle," she cried, tears streaming down her dirty face. "I can't. It hurts so much." The roar of the train was a physical wall of sound now pressing in on them, vibrating through Kayla's bones. Its headlight turned the tunnel into a nightmare of strobing light and dancing, distorted shadows. There was no more time to think. There was only time to act. Kayla ran. She sprinted across the uneven gravel, her lungs burning the beam of her headlamp, bouncing frantically ahead of her. The 100 feet felt like a mile. "Give me your hand!" she yelled as she closed the distance. She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed the girl's arm and hauled her up. The child screamed in pain, but Kayla had no choice. She ducked low, hooked the girl's small, surprisingly light body onto her back in a firefighter's carry she'd learned in a first aid course years ago, and started running back the way she came. The girl who she now knew was named Serena was dead weight, her small frame racked with sobs of pain and fear. "It's okay, sweetie. I've got you," Kayla grunted, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "Just hold on tight. We're going to make it." The train was a charging beast now, right behind them, its horn blaring a single continuous, soul-shattering shriek as the driver, a faceless figure in a lit cabin, finally saw them. But it was useless. It was like trying to stop an asteroid. Kayla knew they couldn't outrun it. But she knew these tunnels better than her own apartment. She knew their secrets. Her mind raced a frantic blueprint of the darkness ahead. There were safety alcoves, shallow pockets carved into the concrete walls for workers. There was one just ahead, 50 feet too close. The train would be on them before they reached it. Then she remembered the old service junction. A heavy steel door set into the wall leading to the maintenance corridors. It was another 20 feet past the alcove. It was their only chance. The wind preceding the train hit them like a physical blow, a solid wall of air that tore at her clothes and tried to rip Serena from her back. The noise was apocalyptic, no longer a sound, but a physical force that hammered at her chest, shaking her teeth in her skull. The ground bucked violently beneath her feet. The light was blinding, washing out all color, all detail. Almost there, she screamed, though neither she nor the girl could hear it over the roar. With a final, desperate surge of strength she didn't know she possessed, Kayla launched themselves off the tracks toward the cold concrete wall. She saw the rusted handle of the service door, a dark, solid shape in the blinding light. She twisted her body in midair, using her own back to shield the child, and slammed against the unyielding steel door just as the locomotive screamed past. A vortex of metal wind and sparks ripped through the space where they had been in Nancon before. The suction was tremendous, a physical pull that tried to drag them back onto the tracks under the churning, merciless wheels. Kayla clung to the handle, her knuckles white, her boots scrabbling for purchase on the narrow concrete ledge. Every muscle in her body straining to hold them against the wall. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing Serena's face into her shoulder as car after thunderous car hammered past each one, a deafening blow of sound and pressure. And then as suddenly as it began, it was over. The red lights of the last car receded into the darkness, and the silence that rushed back in was so absolute it felt like a physical presence. All that remained was the phantom echo of the horn, the acrid smell of hot metal, and the sound of Kayla's own ragged, desperate breaths. They were alive, shaking uncontrollably. Kayla slid down the door to the ground, still cradling the little girl. "It's okay." She gasped the words catching in her throat. "We're safe now." She looked down at the child who was staring at her with wide, terrified but miraculously unheard eyes. "You were so brave. What's your name again?" "Serena." The girl whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay, Serena, I'm Kayla," she said, managing a weak, shaky smile. "Now let's get you out of this tunnel and somewhere warm. What do you say?" She helped Serena up, letting the girl lean heavily on her as they stumbled through the service door into a narrow, dimly lit maintenance corridor. Kayla knew this network. It was a shortcut to one of the auxiliary signal control rooms. The room was a small, windowless box, but to them, it was a sanctuary. It was brightly lit, warm, and filled with the comforting hum of electronics. Kayla eased Serena onto the room's only chair. "Let me see that leg." The girl's ankle was already swelling to the size of a grapefruit, a dark purple bloom of a bruise spreading across her skin. "Definitely a bad sprain, maybe a small fracture," Kayla murmured, her training kicking back in. She retrieved the first aid kit from her locker, expertly fashioning a temporary splint. She gave Serena a bottle of water and a granola bar she'd been saving for her break. As Serena nibbled on the bar, her shivering slowly subsiding, Kayla had her first real chance to observe. The silk dress was clearly designer, even torn and filthy. The small gold locket around her neck looked like real gold. And then she saw the angry red welt on her wrist, a clear, undeniable ligature mark from a zip tie. There was a sluggish, unnatural exhaustion about the child, a focus in her eyes that went beyond the shock of the train, as if she'd been sedated. Serena Kayla asked gently, "The bad men, what did they do to you? They kept me in a dark room. It smelled like wet rocks." Serena said, her voice tiny. They said my daddy would pay a lot of money to get me back. But then they started yelling at each other. One of them left the other one. He got a phone call and got really scared. He grabbed me and ran. He ran with me down here in the dark. He told me to wait in a little room, but I was scared. When he left, I ran. I just kept running in the dark until I saw your light. The story was chilling in its simplicity. Amateur kidnappers who got sloppy, panicked, and bolted. "Who is your daddy? I need to call him. We need to let him know you're safe." "His name is Claudio," Serena said. "I don't know his other name. Everyone just calls him the boss." Kayla felt a fresh wave of ice flood her veins. The boss? This was so much worse than she could have possibly imagined. You don't just call 911 on a man known only as the boss. Doing that could be a death sentence for her, and potentially for the girl. This wasn't a police matter. This was something else entirely. Before she could process the terrifying implications, she heard it. Footsteps in the maintenance corridor outside. Hurried, heavy footsteps. Multiple people. Kayla's heart leaped into her throat. She instantly killed the main lights, plunging the room into the eerie glow of the monitors. She put a finger to her lips, motioning for Serena to be silent, and pushed her gently behind the main control desk. She grabbed her heavy wrench again, her knuckles white. The handle on the steel door turned. The door was thrown open with a deafening crash. Two men in immaculate black suits burst in, guns drawn, their movements fluid and predatory. Their eyes, accustomed to the dark, swept the room in a practiced lethal arc. Clear in here, one of them spoke into a radio on his collar. Negative, though. A voice crackled back, sharp and strained with urgency. The access grate she escaped from is less than 100 yards from that control room. Check again. Find her now. Kayla held her breath, trying to make herself smaller behind the metal desk. They were so close. Suddenly, Serena, terrified and in pain, let out a small, involuntary whimper. It was barely a sound, but in the tense silence, it was a thunderclap. The two men spun instantly, their weapons leveling directly at the control desk. On your feet, hands, where I can see them now. Slowly, heart pounding against her ribs, Kayla stood up, raising her empty hands. Don't shoot, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. There's a child here. She's hurt. The men's professional masks cracked for a fraction of a second as they saw Serena peeking out from behind her, trembling. One of them lowered his gun slightly. It's her, he said into his radio, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. We have the package. Auxiliary Control Room B12. She's not alone. Within minutes, the small corridor was impossibly crowded with men in dark suits, all armed, all moving with a quiet, dangerous purpose. They parted like the sea before Moses. Claudio Messina stepped into the room. He was tall, radiating an aura of cold, absolute power that seemed to suck the very air from the room. His dark eyes, intense and piercing, swept the scene. The first aid supplies Serena's splinted ankle before finally landing on Kayla, pinning her in place with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. Daddy? Serena cried out, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, and limped toward him. Claudio rushed forward and swept his daughter into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her tangled hair. For a single, unguarded moment, the ruthless crime lord vanished, replaced by a father consumed by terror and love. Do you, Serena? He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I thought he held her for a long moment, then gently set her down, his hands on her small shoulders. He looked up, and as his eyes met Kayla's, the father vanished, and the boss returned. The relief in his eyes was instantly replaced by a glacial, cutting suspicion. He saw the wrench still clutched in her hand, her grimy MTA uniform, her defiant stance. I will ask you one time. He said, his voice a low, threatening growl that promised violence. Who are you? And what were you doing with my daughter? Kayla met his gaze without flinching, though her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. My name is Kayla Cooper, she said, her voice clear and ringing in the sudden silence of the room. I'm a signal technician for the MTA, and I'm the person who just saved your daughter's life twice. The silence that followed her statement was absolute, a pocket of stillness in a world that had just been screaming chaos. It stretched for 3, then 5, then 10 seconds. The armed men in the corridor seemed to hold their breath. Claudio's dark eyes bored into her, searching, analyzing, dissecting her words and her posture for any hint of deception. He saw no fear, only exhaustion and a defiant spark of anger. It was not the reaction he was used to. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Enzo, he said, his gaze never leaving Kayla. Take Serena to Dr. Alice. I want a full workup now. The man who had first entered the room, clearly his second-in-command, stepped forward. And her? He asked, gesturing toward Kayla with his chin. She comes with me, Claudio said. The statement was not a request. It was a verdict. The ride to his home was a masterclass in silent intimidation. Kayla was placed in the back of a black Escalade, flanked by 2 guards built like refrigerators. Claudio sat in the front passenger seat, never once looking back, but she could feel his attention on her. a heavy, oppressive weight in the rearview mirror. They moved through the city in a three-car convoy, a silent, deadly procession that parted traffic with its mere presence. They arrived at a limestone fortress on the Upper East Side, a five-story brownstone surrounded by iron gates and unspoken threats. In Tud, the opulence was breathtaking and suffocating: marble floors, priceless art, and a grand staircase that swept upwards into shadow. It was a beautiful, soulless prison. Kayla was escorted to a drawing room and told to wait. She sat on the edge of a velvet sofa that probably cost more than her car, every nerve ending screaming. An hour later, Claudio entered. He had changed from his suit into a dark cashmere sweater and trousers, looking less like a gangster and more like a CEO, which was somehow even more intimidating. "The doctor has confirmed your story," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. Severe sprain exhaustion, dehydration, and trace amounts of a sedative in her bloodstream. He also confirmed that had you not gotten her off those tracks, she would be dead. He pushed a glass toward her. "He called you a hero." "I was just doing my job," she said, not touching the drink. "No," Claudio corrected her, his eyes narrowing. "Your job was to fix a signal box and report anomalies. Your job was not to run into the path of an oncoming freight train. So I ask you again, who are you, Kayla Cooper?" "I'm the daughter of a woman who taught me that you don't turn your back on someone who needs help." Kayla shot back, a flash of anger cutting through her fear. "That's it. There's no angle, no hidden motive." He studied her for a long moment. "That kind of morality is a dangerous thing to have in this city. It can get you killed." "So I'm learning," she said. "Riley." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. "Serena is asking for you. She won't settle down. She seems to have formed an attachment. She's been through a trauma. She needs a friendly face." "Precisely," Claudio said, leaning forward. The intensity of his gaze was startling. Her kidnappers were clumsy amateurs, pawns, hired by someone much more dangerous. "Until I find out who that is, my daughter is still in danger. Every person who comes near her is a potential threat." He paused. "And every person who was near her during the abduction is a potential witness or a suspect. I already told you everything I know. You told me what you think you know," he countered. "Trauma plays tricks on the mind. Serena might remember something a day from now, a week from now, a smell, a word. I need you here when she does." The cold reality of her situation settled over her. "You're not asking me to stay," she said. "You're telling me. I am telling you that for the foreseeable future, you are the most valuable person in my organization." He said, his voice dangerously smooth. "You are the key to my daughter's peace of mind, and potentially the key to finding the men who tried to take her from me. You will be my guest. You will have anything you desire, but you will not leave this house." The gilded cage had snapped shut. The days that followed were a surreal blend of luxury and paranoia. Kayla was given a guest suite that overlooked the private garden, a wardrobe of clothes she was afraid to touch, and food prepared by a private chef. But everywhere she went, a silent guard followed. Her phone was taken away for her own security. Her only respite was Serena. The little girl clung to her like a lifeline. They spent their days in the vast library building pillow forts and reading fairy tales. Slowly, Serena began to heal, her laughter a fragile, beautiful sound in the oppressive silence of the house. But Kayla felt a growing unease. She was being watched not just by the guards, but by the household staff in particular. The head housekeeper, Sophia, a woman in her late 50s with a deceptively maternal smile and eyes that missed nothing. She was always there, offering tea, fluffing pillows, her kindness just a little too perfect. One afternoon, Kayla was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when she overheard Sophia on the phone in the pantry. Her voice a low murmur. Yes, she's with the girl constantly. The boss watches her like a hawk. No opportunity yet. We have to be patient. Sophia emerged a moment later, her warm smile snapping back into place when she saw Kayla. Oh dear, I didn't see you there. Just talking to my sister. You know how she worries. But Kayla had seen the flash of panic in her eyes. An opportunity for what? Few days later, her suspicion grew. Serena had a nightmare screaming in her sleep about the scratchy voice. Kayla was the only one who could calm her. As she sat by the child's bed stroking her hair, she noticed the door to the hallway was cracked open just enough for someone to listen. She rose silently and peered out. The hallway was empty, but she heard the soft swish of a skirt disappearing around the corner. Sophia Kane knew she was in a viper's nest. Marco, the trusted Capo Claudio had mentioned, was a frequent visitor. He always had a kind word for Kayla and a lollipop for Serena, but his eyes were cold and calculating. He watched the growing bond between Kayla and Claudio with an unreadable expression. The true turning point came a week after her arrival. Serena, feeling safe with Kayla, finally remembered something new. "Mommy used to play a game with me," she whispered as they sat in the garden. "A treasure hunt," she said. "If I ever got scared, I should follow the angels." This seemingly innocent comment launched Kayla on a secret, desperate investigation of her own. She noticed for the first time the porcelain angel figurines placed strategically in every major room, a trail, a message. Following Serena's fragmented clues, she discovered the last angel, a heavy crystal paperwheel on Claudio's desk, a hidden switch, a secret compartment, and inside Isabella's journal, the elegant cursive script told a story of love, fear, and betrayal. It was a ledger of treason, detailing how Marco Moretti Claudio's most trusted friend had been selling secrets to their rivals, the Falcone family. The last entry was a frantic, terrified scroll written the day Isabella died. She had discovered Marco's plan to use her and Serena to start a war, and she was going to expose him. "I have to make him believe me." The words sent a chill down Kayla's spine. Isabella had tried to warn him and had paid with her life. Now Kayla held the same toxic secret. That night, Marco found her in the library. She had returned the journal to its hiding place, but she felt as if the words were tattooed on her skin, visible to all. "You've brought a light to this house, Miss Cooper." He said, his voice a smooth, dangerous-y purr. He stood too close, invading her space. "Claudio seems distracted by you. It's good to see him smile, but a man in his position can't afford distractions." "I'm sure he knows what he's doing," Kayla said, her voice tight. "Does he?" Marco's smile was chilling. "He's a man who feels things too deeply. Love, loyalty. They are vulnerabilities, liabilities." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I hear you have a daughter of your own. Emily, isn't it? Such a pretty name. It would be a shame if her mother's distractions were to put her in harm's way." The threat was unmistakable. A cold, sharp blade pressed against the most vulnerable part of her. He knew about Emily. He was telling her that his reach extended far beyond the walls of this house. He knew she had the journal, and he was warning her. He straightened up his friendly mask back in place. "Sleep well, Kayla," he said, patting her shoulder. The touch felt like a spider's crawl. She waited until she heard his car pull away from the house. Then, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and cold, clarifying rage, she walked directly to Claudio's office. The heavy journal clutched in her hand. She didn't knock. He was on the phone, his voice sharp with command. He looked up annoyed at the interruption, then saw the look on her face. He ended the call immediately. "What is it?" She placed the journal on the polished expanse of his desk. "You wanted to find the snake in your house," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "Here he is." Claudio read the journal in absolute suffocating silence. The only sound in the fortress-like office was the soft rustle of the pages turning and the distant, mournful cry of a ship's horn from the river. Kayla watched his face, a study in controlled devastation. She saw the flicker of disbelief, the tightening of his jaw in denial, and finally the slow dawning horror of a cold, terrible understanding. When he reached the last frantic entry from his dead wife, he closed the book with a quiet, reverent finality, as if closing a coffin. The mask of the impassive boss was gone. In its place was the raw, unguarded agony of a man who had been betrayed on every conceivable level. It was the grief for his wife, suddenly fresh and sharp again. It was the horror of realizing he had sheltered her murderer for 2 years, had shaken his hand, had called him brother. And it was the white-hot volcanic fury of a leader whose most trusted soldier had aimed a dagger, not just at him, but at the heart of his family, his daughter. He gave the eulogy at her funeral. Claudio said, his voice a broken whisper that seemed torn from his soul. He carried her coffin. He held me up when I thought I was going to collapse. All of it a lie. He stood and walked to the bulletproof window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. She tried to tell me. The week before she died, she said she was worried about him, that his ambition was becoming dangerous. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her Marco was family. He slammed his fist against the glass with a muffled thud that spoke of unbearable rage and regret. I didn't listen. "You couldn't have known," Kayla said softly, her heart aching for him. "I should have." He spun around, his eyes blazing with a pain so intense it was frightening. "It's my job to know. It's my job to protect my family. And I failed. I failed her. I almost failed Serena." He took a deep, shuddering breath, reigning in the chaos within him. The transformation from grieving husband back to calculating boss happening before her eyes. The grief was being packed away, forged into something harder, colder, and far more lethal. "He threatened you tonight," he stated. "He threatened Emily." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Claudio's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "He's not just a traitor. He's arrogant. He's enjoying this. He's making a move for my entire operation with Falcone's backing. The attacks on my shipments, the chaos on the docks. It's all been him clearing the board for his takeover." He walked back to his desk, his movements now filled with a chilling, predatory grace. "He expects me to confront him," Claudio said, thinking aloud, his mind already working, calculating angles. "He expects me to fly into a rage, accuse him publicly. That would cause a civil war within my own family. Men would be forced to choose his sides. It would be bloody chaotic, and it would give Riccardo Falcone the perfect opportunity to strike while we are bleeding. So what do you do?" "I do what he doesn't expect," Claudio said, a cold fire lighting his dark eyes. "I don't play his game. I play mine." He looked at Kayla, a new, dangerous kind of respect in his gaze. "He made a fatal mistake tonight by threatening you and your daughter." He showed his hand. "He confirmed everything in this book, and he gave me the one weapon I need to destroy him." "What weapon you?" he said simply. "He thinks you are my weakness, a civilian woman, a distraction I've grown soft for. He believes I am compromised emotional. He's going to use you to get to me. And we are going to let him." The plan he laid out was as audacious as it was terrifying. They would not run. They would not hide. They would set a trap, using the most precious bait imaginable, Serena and Kayla herself. The annual St. Jaro Charity Gala is in 3 days, Claudio explained, his voice a low conspiratorial murmur. It's neutral ground hosted by the 5 families, a public event. A ceasefire is always in effect. Marco and Falcone will both be there. It's the one place they'll feel untouchable, surrounded by their own people and the eyes of the entire underworld. You want to walk into a room full of your enemies? Kayla asked, her blood running cold. I want them to see me doing exactly that, he said. I want them to see me looking distracted, weakened by my new attachment. His eyes met hers, and there was a silent apology in them. And I want them to see you on my arm, looking like the perfect, beautiful vulnerability. We will leak a rumor through a source Marco trusts that I am moving Serena to a secure offshore location that very night. A heavily armed decoy convoy will leave from the front of this house, a big public show. And where will Serena actually be? She will be with you in a reinforced penthouse suite at the plaza, the hotel where the gala is being held. Enzo and a small hand-picked team of my most loyal men whose families I have known for generations, will be with you. Marco knows my protocols. He knows I would never leave Serena unprotected, especially not now. He will see the convoy as an obvious trick. His arrogance, his belief that I am a sentimental fool, will tell him that the real prize is hiding in plain sight right under his nose at the hotel. He'll believe he's outsmarting me. He'll come for us at the hotel. Kayla breathed, the terrifying logic of the plan clicking into place. Yes, Claudio said, his voice grim. He and a hand-picked team from Falcone will bypass the main gala security, thinking they are launching a quiet surgical strike to abduct you and my daughter. But what they'll be doing is walking into a steel cage. The entire floor will be locked down. My men will be waiting, and I will catch the snake in my own trap, red-handed in front of witnesses from the other families whom I will have already alerted. The risk was enormous. If anything at all went wrong, she and Serena would be caught in the middle of a war zone. I know it's too much to ask of anyone, Claudio said, his voice softening, seeing the fear she was trying so hard to hide. I can still get you out. I can send you and Emily away tonight. No, Kayla said, interrupting him, surprised at her own resolve. The memory of Marco's smiling threat, the thought of what he had done to Isabella, what he had tried to do to Serena, it solidified her fear into a core of hard, cold steel. You're right. It's the only way. I'll do it. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception. While Claudio and Enzo moved their pieces into place on the city's invisible chessboard, Kayla's job was to play the part of a woman captivated by a dangerous man. Blissfully unaware of the viper coiling at her feet, she had public lunches with Claudio at restaurants where other mob figures could see them. She went on guarded shopping trips on Fifth Avenue, allowing the whispers and stares to follow her. She felt Marco's eyes on her constantly in the house, his friendly smile now looking like a predator's bared teeth. He was watching, waiting, convinced of his own brilliance, convinced of Claudio's weakness. The night of the gala, the air in the house crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Kayla stood before the mirror in her suite, looking at a stranger. She was wearing a floor-length emerald green gown that shimmered under the light, a dress that whispered of power and status. The guardian angel necklace Claudio had given her was a cold, reassuring weight against her skin. He came to her room just before they were due to leave. He stopped in the doorway, his breath catching slightly. In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he was a figure of devastating, dangerous elegance. Isabella would have loved that dress on you, he said quietly, the memory of his wife, a sad, gentle presence between them. He walked toward her and placed a small mother-of-pearl clutch in her hands. This has a silent panic button on the clasp. The instant you press it, Enzo's men move in no matter what. No questions asked. Claudio's. The admission was a small, trembling thing in the quiet room. I know he said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. But you are the strongest woman I have ever met. You ran into the path of a speeding train for my daughter, Kayla. Marco Moretti is nothing compared to that. He leaned in and kissed her. A deep, desperate kiss filled with fear and hope and the unspoken promise of a future they might not live to see. I will end this tonight, he whispered against her lips, his voice a raw vow. And then I am coming back for you, I promise. The penthouse suite at the plaza was the epitome of luxury, a gilded cage on the 35th floor. From the vast windows, Kayla could see the city glittering below a universe away from the violence that was about to unfold. Serena was asleep in the master bedroom, blissfully unaware a sedative from Dr. Alessi ensuring she would sleep through the night. Enzo and 3 other grim-faced men who moved with the quiet confidence of lifelong soldiers, were stationed in the living area, their eyes constantly scanning security feeds on a laptop. The wait was a physical torture. Hour 2. Kayla paced the thick carpet, the silk of her gown whispering with every step. Then a flicker on one of the screens. Enzo leaned in, his body instantly alert. Lobby elevator service corridor access, he murmured. 4 men, Falcone's colors. Kayla's heart leaped into her throat. They're bypassing the main elevators, another guard said, his voice low and calm. They're coming up the service stairs just as the boss predicted. Positions, Enzo commanded, a grim smile touching his face. He checked the suppressor on his weapon. No noise. On my mark. Kayla's job was simple. Stay in the bedroom with Serena and do not open the door. She retreated into the room, her hand hovering over the panic button on her clutch. She could hear the faint, almost imperceptible sounds of movement from the suite's main door. A soft click, a metallic scrape. They were bypassing the electronic lock. The door swung open silently. The ensuing firefight was a terrifying ballet of suppressed violence. From the bedroom, Kayla could only hear the muffled percussive thips of silence pistols, a series of heavy thuds, a choked cry, a gasp. It was over in less than 30 seconds. Silence descended again, thick and absolute. Then a soft knock on the bedroom door. Kayla, Enzo's voice called out. It's clear. Her knees weak with relief. She opened the door. The living room was a scene of controlled carnage. 4 men in dark tactical gear laid dead on the floor. Enzo's team was unscathed, already securing the bodies. Was that all of them? She asked, her voice a whisper. Enzo's face was grim. No, this was just the advance team. The main event is still downstairs. He tapped his earpiece, listening intently. Boss, the package has been delivered. The nest is clear. We are en route to the ballroom. Your play. What's happening? Kayla asked. As Enzo ushered her and a still sleeping Serena out of the suite and toward a private, guarded elevator. Marco just realized his team isn't answering their comms. Enzo said, a cold, predatory light in his eyes. The trap has been sprung. Now the boss just has to close the door. The grand ballroom of the plaza was a sea of jewels and tuxedos, a glittering facade of civility. The music, a gentle string quartet, stopped abruptly as Claudio's voice, amplified by the microphone on the stage, cut through the air like a shard of glass. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the interruption, he said, his voice dangerously, unnaturally calm. But it seems we have a traitor in our midst. A collective gasp went through the room. At a table near the front, Riccardo Falcone, the head of his family, began to rise, his face a mask of theatrical fury. But before he could take a step, the men at his own tablemen from the other families, all part of Claudio's secret alliance, stood and blocked him in their hands inside their jackets. Falcone froze his eyes wide with the realization that he had been completely outplayed. On the stage behind Claudio, the large video screens that had been showing images of the charity suddenly flickered to life. They now showed a crystal-clear live feed from the hotel security cameras, a feed of the 35th floor hallway, littered with the bodies of Falcone's men. Tonight, Claudio continued, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. Riccardo Falcone and my own trusted capo Marco Moretti attempted to kidnap my daughter for a second time. He looked directly across the room at Marco, who stood frozen by the bar, his face ashen with disbelief and dawning horror. They did this just as they conspired 2 years ago to murder my wife, Isabella. From his jacket pocket, Claudio produced Isabella's journal. She left behind proof of your greed, your ambition, and your betrayal, Marco. She knew. And now everyone here knows. He looked around the room at the powerful, silent figures of the other family bosses. He has broken every code we live by. He has brought war to our doorstep and targeted women and children. He has no honor. Marco cornered, exposed, and utterly ruined. Did the only thing a desperate animal could do. He drew a small silver pistol hidden in his tuxedo. Panic erupted. People screamed and dove for cover, but he never had a chance to aim. A single unsilenced gunshot rang out, a deafening crack that shattered the opulent silence. It came not from the stage, but from the back of the room. Enzo, having just entered from a service door, stood with his weapon drawn, smoke curling from the barrel. Marco Moretti collapsed to the floor, a single neat hole in his forehead, his eyes wide with surprise. The silence that followed was absolute. Claudio looked down at the body of the man he had once called brother, his face devoid of any emotion except a cold, hard finality. The war was over. He had won. But the cost was written in the lines of grief and exhaustion etched on his face. He dropped the microphone to the stage, the feedback screeching through the silent room, and his eyes searched the crowd until they found Kayla standing in the doorway safe. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The aftermath of the gala was a quiet, efficient storm. By the time the sun's first pale fingers touched the New York skyline, the bodies had vanished. The ballroom had been meticulously cleaned, and the official story fed to the press by a well-paid hotel manager was a tragic but contained gas explosion in a service kitchen. The underworld, however, understood the truth. The Messina family, under the leadership of Claudio Messina, had been tested by the deepest betrayal and had not only survived, but emerged stronger, more ruthless, and more respected than ever. The Falcone empire, beheaded and exposed, crumbled into factional warfare overnight, their power broken. But in the penthouse high above the awakening city, the victory felt ashen and cold. Claudio stood on the terrace, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, watching the dawn paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and fragile pink. He hadn't slept. The ghost of Marco's surprised face, the echo of that final gunshot, played on a loop in his mind. Kayla came out to join him, wrapping one of his cashmere blankets around her shoulders against the morning chill. She stood beside him, not speaking, simply sharing the heavy silence, a small, solid achiker in the wreckage of his world. "It's done," he said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that sounded like grief. "It's over." "I know," she said softly. He turned to her, and in the unforgiving morning light she could see the true cost of the victory in his eyes. The loss of the man he thought was his brother, the ugly resurrected truth of his wife's murder. It had carved new permanent lines into his face. He looked older, wearier, a king who had secured his throne, but lost a part of his soul in the process. "I plunged you into my hell, Kayla," he said, his voice filled with a self-loathing that broke her heart. "You've seen the worst of me, the worst of my world, the violence, the death. I've also seen the best of it," she replied, her voice steady and clear. She took his free hand, her fingers lacing with his. It was cold, but she held it firmly. "I've seen a father who would burn the world to the ground for his daughter. I saw a man who was willing to trust a stranger, even when it went against every instinct he had. I saw the man who read stories to his little girl until she fell asleep. He looked down at their joined hands, a muscle working in his jaw. Marco was right about one thing. You have made me soft, no," she said, her grip tightening, forcing him to look at her. "You haven't gone soft. You've just remembered how to be human. There's a difference." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and the formidable walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart over years of loss and violence finally irrevocably crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, dropping the glass which shattered silently on the stone terrace. He buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with a single silent sob of grief and relief. "Stay," he whispered. The single word, a raw, desperate plea. "Don't leave me. Stay. I'm not going anywhere," she promised, her own tears finally falling hot against his shoulder. "I'm right here." A month later, Kayla stood in the doorway of her old apartment in Queens. It looked small, cramped like a life that belonged to someone else. Two of Claudio's most trusted and now familiar faces were there, carefully packing her meager belongings into boxes. It felt less like moving and more like an archaeological dig of a forgotten civilization. On the counter was a thick, leather-bound folder. Inside was a new driver's license, a new social security card, and a passport. The name on all of them read, Kayla Messina. It was both terrifying and thrilling. She walked through the rooms one last time, a ghost in her own past. She touched the now dead basil plant on the windowsill. Her old life, the life of Kayla Cooper signal technician, was over. She had walked into a dark tunnel and emerged on the other side as someone entirely new. Her phone rang. It was a new phone, a secure one that Claudio had given her. The caller ID simply said, "Home." "Are you ready?" his voice asked. The familiar deep rumble, no longer a sound of intimidation, but of profound comfort. Kayla looked out the window at the familiar noisy streets of her neighborhood, at the life of predictable safety she was leaving behind. Then she looked past her own reflection at the sky beyond. A new life was waiting, a dangerous, complicated, uncertain life, shadowed by the world she was now a part of. But it was also a life that would be filled with a fierce protective love and a family broken and forged in violence, but a family nonetheless that she had chosen and been chosen by. Yet she said, a real genuine smile finally reaching her eyes, "I'm coming home." On the other end of the line, she could hear Serena in the background laughing. It was the most beautiful sound in the world.